3 years after my husband disappeared, his family decided I did not belong in his house or in their lives. And that is how I ended up sitting on a hard plastic bench at a crowded bus station, with my little girl pressed against my side and our whole life squeezed into 2 tired bags at my feet. I remember staring at that one-way ticket in my hand, a ticket to a small town I had picked just because it was cheap and far enough away that nobody would know my name. And I kept hearing my mother-in-law's voice from that morning, standing in the doorway of the house my paychecks had helped keep, telling me I did not belong there, telling me to go wherever her son had gone, as if I had packed his suitcase and pushed him out myself. The air at that station smelled like diesel and cold coffee. People were rushing past us with purpose, and I sat there trying to look calm so my little girl would not see how my hands were shaking, while inside I felt as empty as the bottom of my purse. I told myself that as soon as we got on that bus, I would start over. I would find a small room somewhere. I would work any job I could find, and I would teach my girl that we could survive without anyone's pity, even if my heart was breaking in quiet pieces. And then, just as they called for boarding, I heard the sound of an engine that did not match the tired buses around us, and a black luxury SUV pulled up right in front of the station. The kind of car you see in those neighborhoods where people pretend they have no problems. The window rolled down, and there she was, my husband's younger sister Karen, the one who never had a kind word for me, looking straight at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. As she opened the door and said, "Get in. I need to tell you something important. Thank you for listening to my story. And before I go any further, I would like you to do something for me. Please tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because even though I cannot see your face, it helps my heart to know where you are sitting while you hear my voice." My name is Rose, and I live in Alaska now, in a place where the winters are long and quiet. And sometimes when the snow is falling outside my window, I think back over the years that brought me here, to this moment, to that bus station, and to that black car that pulled up in front of me when I thought my life was finished. I was not always this calm woman you hear right now. I used to be softer in some ways, more trusting, and I believed that if you worked hard and loved your family, they would always stand beside you. But life has a way of testing what you believe, and mine started testing me the day I fell in love with a man who promised me the world, then left me with questions instead of answers. I met my husband when I was younger and still thought love could fix anything. He had this easy smile and a laugh that made people turn their heads, and he told me that with me by his side he could become anything he wanted to be. And I believed him. So I worked and saved and put aside my own small dreams so his could grow. I come from a very simple background. No fancy neighborhood, no rich parents, just people who knew how to stretch a dollar and how to say thank you for every little thing, while his family had more than we did. And they never let me forget it. They walked like the world owed them something. And they treated their last name like a crown that they were doing me a favor by letting me wear. When I married into that house, I promised myself I would be grateful for the roof over my head and the new family I was gaining. I cleaned those floors until my knees hurt. I cooked meals that I paid for with my own paycheck. I watched the bills like a hawk. And I went to sleep every night thinking that someday his mother would look at me and see not just the woman her son married, but a daughter she could lean on. Instead, from the very beginning, I learned to live with little cuts to my spirit, small comments that sounded like jokes but felt like blades, questions about how I spent my money, how long I stayed in the shower, how often I talked on the phone to my own family, and every time I tried to shrug it off, I told myself that marriage meant patience, that building a family meant swallowing some pride. Even in those early years, when my daughter was still small and the house was full of noise and movement, there was always this quiet pressure in the air, this feeling that I was being measured and always found a little bit lacking, like a dress that never quite fit them right, no matter how much I tried to adjust myself. I kept telling myself that as long as my husband was beside me, I could handle anything, that we were a team, that we would grow old together and laugh about these hard times one day. And when I went to work tired and came home to cook and clean, I did it with that picture in my mind. I did not know then that the same walls I scrubbed were listening to conversations I would not hear until it was far too late, and that behind closed doors, people who shared his blood were already blaming me for storms I did not create, and were already preparing to push me out the moment he was no longer standing between us. Now, when I speak to you from this cold corner of Alaska, where the air bites your cheeks and the sky stays gray for long stretches of time, I understand that sometimes the hardest part of life is not the cold outside, but the cold that can sit at your own dinner table, pretending to smile at you while it waits for you to slip. So as you listen to me, wherever you are, maybe in a warm kitchen, maybe lying down after a long day, I want you to know that this story is not just about a man who left and a woman who was kicked out. It is also about how a person can lose almost everything: reputation, home, and safety, and still find a way to stand up again, to pick up a little girl with one arm, carry 2 bags with the other, and refuse to let bitterness be the only thing that survives. When I think back to the beginning, to those first years when everything still felt possible, I almost want to reach through time and take that younger version of myself by the hands and tell her to look a little closer, to listen to the pauses between people's words, because the truth was already there, hiding in plain sight. My husband was charming. There is no way around that. He could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were exactly the person he wanted to see. And when he looked at me across a crowded space and smiled, I felt like the luckiest woman alive, like I had finally been chosen after a lifetime of doing the choosing for everyone else. He told me that he wanted a home filled with laughter, that he wanted a partner who was not afraid of hard work. And I told him that if we stood side by side, I would work with him until my hands were tired and my feet were sore, because I believed that honest effort could build a good life for anyone who truly wanted it. But from the very start, his family did not see me the way he did. His mother would look me up and down, not rude enough to be openly cruel, but never warm enough to make me feel welcomed. And she had this way of making little comments that stayed with me long after I washed the dishes and turned off the kitchen light. Things like, "Some women talk too much and forget their place," or, "Some people spend without thinking about where the money comes from," and I always knew exactly who she meant. His sister Karen was younger, prettier in that polished way money can buy, always in a new outfit, always on her phone, and when she spoke to me, it was usually to correct something. My pronunciation of a word, the way I set the table, even the brand of soap I bought. As if everything I did proved I did not fully understand what it meant to carry their name. Still, for a long time, I tried to brush it off, because when it was just me and my husband in our room at night, he would hold me and tell me not to worry. He would say that his family was just particular, that they would come around once they saw how loyal and steady I was, and I clung to those words like a blanket, wrapping them around the parts of me that felt small and unwelcome. I went out early to work and came home late. I learned how to stretch groceries so the pantry never looked empty. I saved every extra dollar, and when his mother made a face at something I cooked, I simply smiled and told myself that tomorrow I would do better. Because I wanted peace more than I wanted to be right. I did not know back then that the cracks were already spreading under the surface, that the respect I thought we were building together would be the first thing to blow away when the wind picked up, and that one day, when he walked out that front door and did not come back, they would not remember the woman who held that house together. They would only remember the stories they had told themselves about me. The day everything truly began to unravel did not look like a disaster at first. It started like any ordinary morning in that house, with the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen, and the sound of my husband moving around in our room, zipping and unzipping a bag that I thought was just for a short work trip. Nothing more. He told me he had a meeting in another city, something about a project that could finally put us ahead, and even though there was a tightness around his eyes that I could not quite name, I pushed the worry aside and focused on packing him a small lunch, slipping in an extra sandwich the way I always did. like a quiet reminder that someone at home was thinking about him. I remember standing in the doorway as he tied his shoes, watching the way his hands moved a little faster than usual, and I asked him if everything was all right. And he smiled, but it was the kind of smile that barely touched his eyes. He said he was just tired, just stressed, that this trip would help him straighten things out, and he promised he would call as soon as he arrived. Our little girl wrapped her arms around his leg, and he bent down, kissed her forehead, kissed mine, and said he would be back before we could miss him. Then he picked up his bag, walked through the living room without looking back, and the door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. For the first few hours after he left, I kept myself busy, cleaning the kitchen, folding laundry, telling myself not to be dramatic. But as the sun moved across the sky and the afternoon turned into evening, I kept checking my phone, waiting for that message that never came. By the time night settled in and the house fell quiet, there was a strange heaviness in the air, the kind that makes you feel like the walls are listening. And I sat on the edge of our bed with my phone in my hand, calling his number over and over, hearing it ring and then stop, or go straight to voicemail. And each time I told myself there must be a simple explanation. Bad signal, a dead battery, anything but the truth. I felt slowly curling in my stomach. I did not know it then, but that ordinary morning, with coffee on the stove and his shoes by the door, was the last time I would see him standing in that house. The last time I would hear his footsteps in that hallway. And the beginning of 3 long years where every unanswered call would be turned into a weapon his family used against me. The first few days after he left, I tried to hold on to calm. I told myself that people get busy, that meetings run late, that phones die at the worst times. And every time I called and heard his voice on the recorded greeting, I would leave another message, my voice a little tighter than before, asking him to call when he could, telling him that we were fine, that we were waiting. By the end of that first week, the excuses I made for him began to crumble. I called the hotel he said he was staying at, and they told me there was no reservation in his name. I checked with the company he claimed to be meeting, and they sounded confused when I mentioned him. And I remember standing in the small hallway of that house, phone pressed to my ear, feeling the cold spread through my chest, as I realized that the story he had given me did not match anything in the real world. I went to the police station with shaking hands, carrying a recent photo of him and trying to keep my voice steady as I filled out the missing person report. And when the officer behind the desk asked me if we had argued before he left, if he had any reason to walk away on his own, I felt my cheeks burn, not because of something I had done, but because I could already hear his family answering that question differently. Back at home, his mother started talking as if he had chosen to vanish. She would sit in the living room with the television on and tell relatives on the phone that I must have pushed him too hard, that some women do not know when to stop nagging, that a man can only take so much before he looks for peace somewhere else. And she said these things loudly enough for me to hear while I washed dishes in the kitchen, my eyes stinging as I stared at the soap bubbles. Karen would lean against the doorway, her arms crossed, and ask me if I had checked my own behavior. She would suggest that maybe I had been too demanding, maybe I had made him feel small, and every time she did, a part of me wanted to shout that I had been the one paying bills and holding everything together. But I swallowed the words because I still believed he might walk back through that door, and I did not want to deepen the cracks. Weeks turned into months. The missing person case grew cold. The few leads went nowhere, and slowly people stopped asking if I had heard from him. They only asked what I must have done to make a man disappear like that. As if love could vanish like smoke, just because one person talked too much. In those long nights, when the house was quiet, and I could hear my little girl breathing in her sleep, I would sit at the edge of the bed with the phone in my hand, scrolling through old messages, where he told me he loved me and believed in us, and I would replay them over and over, trying to find the sentence where everything started to crack, and I could not understand how the man who wrote those words had become a ghost that everyone blamed me for creating. Time has a strange way of moving when you are waiting for someone who never calls. The days turned into weeks, then months, and before I knew it, I could count the time since my husband walked out that door in birthdays, school terms, and seasons, but not in any messages from him, not in any sign that he remembered the home he left behind. I kept going because I did not see another choice. I woke up before the sun, made breakfast, packed a small lunch, went to work, came back to cook and clean, helped my little girl with schoolwork at the kitchen table, and then lay awake at night, listening to the house settle, wondering if he was sleeping somewhere warm or shivering on some stranger's couch. The missing person report became just another file in a drawer. The police stopped calling unless they had a form for me to update, and his family stopped talking about looking for him at all. They only talked about me, about how long I would stay in that house, about how they had sacrificed so much to keep a roof over our heads, as if my paychecks and my tired feet had never touched those floors. Little by little, the kindness dried up, the way water disappears in a shallow dish. His mother would leave bills on the table for me to see, electricity, groceries, repairs, and she would sigh and say things like, "Money does not grow on trees, you know," as if I had not just handed over almost everything I had earned that week. Karen would come by with shopping bags and new shoes, sit on the couch scrolling on her phone, and look around our shared space like it was a hotel that had started to disappoint her. Then she would glance at me and say that some people did not know when their season in a place was over, that holding on too long only made things worse. I told myself I would stay until I had enough saved to move out on my own. But every time I got close, something happened. Someone needed a doctor, the car broke down, a bill came late with a fee on top, and my little bit of savings would vanish again, leaving me with nothing but the hope that maybe he would come back and at least explain why he left. In my heart, I still believed that the man I married could not be as cruel as the silence he left behind. I thought he must be hurt or lost or ashamed, and that when he finally found the courage to return, it would all make sense somehow. And because I held on to that belief, I did not see how deeply his family had already decided that I was no longer one of them. That to them I was not a wife waiting for her husband. I was a problem waiting to be removed. The day they finally said the words out loud began quietly. Like so many others, I was in the kitchen making breakfast, frying eggs in a pan that had seen better years, spreading a thin layer of jelly on toast, thinking about the extra shift I had taken that week and how I might finally be able to put a little aside again, when I heard my name called from the living room in that tone that tells you this is not a normal conversation. I wiped my hands on a towel, told my little girl to finish her food, and walked in to find them all sitting there. His mother on the main couch with her arms folded, an uncle I barely spoke to standing by the window, and Karen leaning back in a chair with her legs crossed, her phone in her hand like she was half present and half somewhere else. The television was off, the curtains were only half open, and the air felt thick, like the room itself knew what was about to happen. His mother did not ask me to sit down. She looked at me with a tired kind of judgment and said they had been talking and that things could not continue like this. At first, I did not understand what she meant. I thought maybe it was another complaint about the bills or the groceries, but then she said it straight. "We have carried you long enough. You do not belong here anymore. My son is gone, and we cannot keep pretending this is your house. You should go wherever he went, if he even wants you there." Her words hit me harder than a slap. I opened my mouth to speak, to remind her that my paychecks had kept the lights on and food on the table, that I had worked myself sick to make sure there was always something in the fridge. But when I tried to talk, she held up her hand like I was a naughty child, and said I should be grateful they had let me stay as long as they did. Karen finally looked up from her phone and added that it was not healthy for anyone to keep living in the past, that I was making the whole family look stuck, that people were starting to talk, and that I needed to accept reality, that he was not coming back, and neither was the life I thought I had. Then his mother nodded toward the doorway, and for the first time I noticed the old suitcase sitting by the front door. The same suitcase he had used so many times for trips, now standing there packed with my clothes, my things, folded by hands that did not love me, as if I were a visitor whose time had expired. She told me they had put a little money in an envelope for me, that it was all they could do, because they had their own lives to think about. And she said it with such finality that I felt my knees weaken, but I refused to fall apart in front of them. I looked around that room, at the faded pictures on the walls, at the couch I had cleaned again and again, at the floor I had scrubbed on my hands and knees, and it hit me that in their eyes none of it mattered. Not the years, not the effort, not the loyalty. I was just someone they had decided did not belong. I went back to the kitchen, helped my little girl finish her breakfast, with my voice steady even though my heart was shaking. Then I took our few clothes, our documents, and the little bit of dignity I had left, and I walked to that front door, picked up the suitcase they had packed for me, and stepped out of that house without looking back, because I knew if I turned around, I might start begging to stay. And I refused to give them that satisfaction. Walking away from that house, pulling the suitcase with one hand and holding my little girl's fingers with the other, felt like walking away from a fire I had spent years trying to keep from burning out of control. Only to be told it was my fault. The whole place was in flames. The sky was clear, the air was sharp in my lungs, and every step sounded louder than it should have on the sidewalk, as if the ground itself wanted to remember that moment. I did not cry then, not in front of the neighbors, not on the bus ride across town, not when we climbed down with our bags and started the short walk to the station. I kept my face steady and my back straight. Because when you have a small hand tucked into yours, you learn quickly that your tears are heavy bricks that fall on smaller shoulders, and I refused to add any more weight to hers. When we reached the bus station, the noise and movement swallowed us up. There were people arguing over luggage, children tugging on sleeves, an old man asleep in the corner with his hat over his face. And I stood there for a moment in the middle of it all, feeling strange, like I had slipped out of my own life and into someone else's. I went to the counter, slid my few bills under the glass, and bought the cheapest one-way ticket I could find to a town 2 hours away, a place I had only ever seen once on a map. And as the woman printed it, I told myself that maybe starting over where no one knew my name would be less painful than staying in a city where everyone knew my story. But not the truth. We sat down on a cracked plastic bench near the edge of the platform, our suitcase beside us, our other bag at our feet. And I watched my little girl hug her stuffed rabbit to her chest and rest her head against my arm, her trust in me so complete that it almost made it hard to breathe. I wanted to promise her that everything would be all right, that the road ahead would be kinder than the place we had just left, but the words stuck in my throat, because I did not know if they would be true. They called out the time for our bus on the overhead speakers, the sound echoing through the high ceiling, and I looked down at the ticket in my hand, at the printed destination that meant nothing yet. And I thought, this is it. This is the moment my old life ends, and whatever comes next begins, whether I am ready or not. I was still staring at that ticket when I heard the low purr of an engine that did not match the tired rumble of the buses around us, and a black luxury SUV rolled to a stop near the entrance, its paint shining too clean for that dusty lot, the kind of car that turns heads even when people pretend not to look. The window on the driver's side slid down, and I saw her, Karen, sitting there with her hair perfectly done and sunglasses hiding half her face, but not the tightness in her mouth. She pulled the glasses down, looked straight at me, then at my little girl, and for the first time since I had known her, her eyes did not look sharp and amused. They looked heavy, wet, like she had not slept in days. She stepped out, heels clicking on the concrete, walked closer than I expected, and without any of her usual attitude, she simply said, "Get in. I need to tell you something important." Her voice softer than I had ever heard it, almost shaking on the last word. For a moment I stayed seated, my fingers dug into the handle of the suitcase, my pride screaming that I should ignore her and get on that bus, that I owed her nothing, not after the years of silence and blame. But then I looked at her face, really looked, and saw not the girl who used to roll her eyes at me in the kitchen, but a woman carrying something heavy in her chest, something that would not let her walk away. My little girl looked up at me and whispered my name in a small, questioning voice, and I realized that whatever Karen had come to say, whatever secret she had been holding, it was tied to our future as surely as the ticket in my hand. And I could not just turn my back on that, not when my whole life had been dragged through their version of the story. So I stood up slowly, nodded once, and told my girl that we were going to sit in the car for a little while, just to listen. We loaded our bags into the back, climbed into the front and back seats, and as the door closed beside me and the sound of the station faded, I felt the strangest mix of fear and fragile hope. Because I knew that whatever came out of that envelope she held tight against her chest would finally break the silence that had been choking me for 3 long years. Inside that car, the noise of the station slipped away like someone had closed a door on the whole world. The engine hummed under us, and for a few moments, none of us spoke. Karen kept her eyes on the windshield, her hands tight on the steering wheel, and I could see the small tremor in her fingers as she pulled away from the curb and drove to a quieter side street. Away from buses and people and the sound of names being called through old speakers. When she finally parked, she let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for years. Then she reached down to the passenger side floor and picked up a thick envelope. The paper soft at the edges, like it had been handled too many times, and she turned toward me with a look I had never seen on her face before. A strange mix of guilt and fear and something almost like regret. She held the envelope out to me and said, her voice low and shaking, that everything I thought I knew about why her brother left was wrong, that there were things their family had kept from me, things that had twisted the story until even they started believing their own lies. And if I wanted to know the truth, it was all inside those papers. I took the envelope with hands that suddenly felt clumsy and numb, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And I opened it slowly, careful not to tear anything, because some part of me already knew that whatever I was about to see would not be easily undone. The first thing I pulled out was a copy of a bank statement with my name printed at the top next to an account I had never opened, followed by more pages, more accounts, more numbers that did not belong to any paycheck I had ever brought home. And as I flipped through them, line after line of withdrawals and transfers, Karen started to talk, explaining that long before he disappeared, my husband had lost his job, that he had been hiding how bad things were, and instead of telling me the truth, he had turned to gambling and easy money, until easy became desperate and desperate became dangerous. She told me that when the debt started piling up, instead of coming to me, instead of sitting down at our own kitchen table and being honest, he had gone to the bank with my information, opened loans in my name, forged my signature, and used that money to chase the same losing streak that was eating him alive. All while I walked around that house thinking I was the problem, thinking my talking or my spending or my simple existence was what drove him away. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at those pages, remembering every time his mother had accused me of wasting money. Every moment, Karen had hinted that I did not know how to manage a household, and suddenly the floor of the story dropped out from under me, because now I could see how they had stood in their living room, calling me irresponsible, while holding in their hands proof that their beloved son had been the one quietly dragging our names through the mud. Behind the statements, there were copies of admission forms from a rehab clinic, his name written in dark ink, dates that matched the months when I had been sitting at home wondering why I could not reach him, and seeing his signature there, not on a love letter or a birthday card, but on a form that admitted he had a problem, made my throat tighten so much I could barely swallow. Karen said he had called her, not me, when everything finally collapsed, that he had begged her not to tell me, that he was going to fix it and come back once he got clean and paid off the worst of it. And she had agreed, thinking it would protect me somehow, thinking that hiding the truth was kinder than letting me see how far he had fallen. And as she spoke, I felt a deep, slow anger rising beneath the grief, because while I was being blamed and judged and pushed out, the truth had been folded up neatly in an envelope that no one had the courage to hand me until the day I was sitting with a one-way ticket and nowhere to sleep. Beneath the rehab papers and the bank statements, there was one more thing in that envelope, a folded sheet of lined paper with edges that looked worn from being handled. And the moment I saw his handwriting on the outside, my breath caught in my throat, because even after 3 years of silence, I still knew the way he wrote my name. My fingers shook as I opened it, and the first line hit me so hard I had to close my eyes for a second. He wrote that if I was reading this, it meant he had not been strong enough to come back the way he wanted to, that he was sorry for the damage he had done, not just to our money, but to my name, my peace, and the way his family looked at me. In that letter, he admitted everything, every loan taken in my name without my knowledge, every lie he told to cover the hole he was digging. He wrote that none of it was my fault, that I had been the one keeping things afloat while he pretended to be the provider, and that if anyone ever tried to say otherwise, this letter was the proof they were lying. I could feel tears running down my face as I read his words, but the worst part came when I asked Karen, with a voice that did not sound like mine, where he was now, if he was still in rehab somewhere. If there was a chance, he might walk through some door again, even if it was not ours. And she looked away, stared out the window for a long moment, then told me that he had died almost a year earlier, that he had overdosed after leaving the clinic, that the call had come in the middle of the night, and the family had handled it quietly, as if they were dealing with a stain they did not want anyone to see. While I sat at our kitchen table back then, checking my phone, and wondering if he was still alive, they had already buried him, a small funeral, a few relatives, a closed casket, and not a single word to the woman he had left behind, or to the little girl who still asked if her father would be home by Christmas. The room seemed to tilt for a moment, as I tried to understand how a family could look me in the eye every day, accept my money for bills, let me sweep and cook and wash under the same roof where they had mourned him, and still act like I was the embarrassment that needed to be removed. Karen kept talking, her voice thick, and said there was more, that before he died he had gone to a lawyer and signed papers to transfer what little he had left into my name. A small apartment he bought before things got really bad, and a written statement saying the debts tied to my name were his doing, not mine, that I should be protected, not punished. She said the lawyer had called the house, had asked for me, had explained that I needed to come in to sign some things, but his mother had intercepted those calls, told him I was not available, told him the family would handle it, and then locked the truth away, pretending there was nothing, while I walked around that house feeling smaller and smaller, thinking I had nothing but the clothes in my suitcase. Sitting there in that car, holding his confession in one hand and the copies of legal documents in the other, I felt a storm of anger, grief, and relief tearing through me all at once, because the man who had hurt me the most had finally told the truth on paper, even if he had not had the courage to say it to my face, and the people who claimed to love him the most had taken that truth and used silence like a knife against me. After a while, when my tears finally slowed enough for me to breathe without choking on them, I looked at Karen and asked one simple question. Why now? Why bring this to me on the day they threw me out? And she dropped her gaze to her hands and said that seeing me at the bus station with my suitcase and my little girl had finally made something in her break, that she could not carry the lie anymore, that every time she watched her mother blame me for what her brother had done, she heard his voice in that letter calling her a witness, someone who knew the truth and would either protect us or betray us. She told me there was an appointment with the lawyer that same afternoon, that he still had the original documents waiting, and that if I wanted to claim what was mine and clear my name, I needed to go there with her instead of getting on that bus to nowhere. And as I sat there in the passenger seat, my hands full of proof that my life had not been exactly what I had been told, I realized I was standing at another kind of doorway. Just like the front door of that house, Only this time I was the one who would decide if I stepped through. I thought about the years I had spent shrinking myself to fit into their version of the story. About the nights I had lain awake, worrying about debts I did not understand. About the way they had looked at me that morning, like I was something to be wiped off their shoes. And I felt something hard and steady rise up inside me. Not loud, not vengeful, just a quiet refusal to stay the victim in a story that had finally put the truth in my hands. I nodded slowly and told her to drive, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. And as we pulled away from that side street, I glanced back at the bus station fading in the distance and thought about how close I had come to disappearing into some small town with nothing but 2 bags and a wounded heart, never knowing that there was a set of keys and a signed confession with my name on it waiting on a lawyer's desk. When we stepped into the lawyer's office, the air smelled like paper and old coffee, and the man behind the desk looked up with a mixture of surprise and relief when he saw me. He said my name like he had been practicing it alone for months, and then he asked me, very gently, why I had not come sooner, because from where he sat, it looked like I had been the one wronged more than anyone. I sat down across from him, laid the copies from the envelope on his desk, and listened as he opened a file drawer and pulled out the originals, the signed transfer of the small apartment, the letter stating in clear terms that the debts in my name were the result of fraud and should not be pursued against me. And as he explained what each page meant, what protections were already written into law on my behalf, I felt the weight of 3 years of blame begin to shift, not disappear, but move from my shoulders back toward the man who had caused the mess and the family who had chosen to hide his attempt to make it right. For the first time in a long time, I did not feel like someone waiting for permission to exist. I felt like a woman who had been handed back pieces of herself that had been stolen in the night. And as I looked down at those documents, at my name printed clearly beside words like owner and beneficiary instead of debtor and burden, a small voice inside me whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a life where I did not have to apologize for simply being where I had every right to stand. When the lawyer finished explaining everything and placed the set of keys on the desk in front of me, I just stared at them for a long moment, small and ordinary and shining under the office light, and it struck me that these keys meant more than any door I had ever walked through in my life. They were proof that somewhere in this city there was a place with my name on it that no one could throw me out of with a suitcase and an envelope full of blame. We left the office together, Karen walking a few steps behind me like she was not sure if she was allowed to walk beside me anymore, and the ride to the apartment was quiet. My little girl dozed off in the back seat, her head leaning to one side, while I held the keys in my hand and turned them over and over, feeling the weight of metal and responsibility and something new, something like fragile hope. When we pulled up to the building, it was nothing special from the outside. Just a tired-looking place, with peeling paint and a cracked sidewalk, no flowers by the entrance, no fancy lobby. But to me, it looked like a doorway someone had carved out of stone with their bare hands, just so I would have a way out of the life that had been crushing me. We carried our bags up the stairs, the steps creaking under our feet, and I stood in front of the door with the number that matched the one on the papers, slid the key into the lock with hands that were still trembling. And when it turned and the door opened with a soft click, it felt like I had just opened a new chapter in a book I thought was already finished. The apartment was small and empty. The air smelled like dust and old paint. Sunlight pushed through thin curtains and fell across bare floors, and there was nothing inside except quiet. No raised voices, no accusing eyes, no sense that I was taking up too much space just by breathing. And for the first time in a very long time, I let myself exhale without holding anything back. I watched my little girl walk slowly into the room, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, her eyes wide as she turned in a slow circle. And when she asked me if this was our home now, if this was where we were going to sleep tonight, I felt my throat tighten, and I whispered yes. Yes, it is. This is ours. And I could hear the truth of it, echo in the empty walls like a blessing. Karen stood near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, and she quietly said that she knew saying sorry would never be enough, that there were no words big enough to cover the years of silence and the days she had spent looking the other way, but that she would spend the rest of her life trying to do better, if I let her. Not for her brother's sake, but for mine and for the little girl who had never done anything to deserve any of this. I did not rush to forgive her, because forgiveness is not something you can hand out like a receipt. I simply told her that the first step she had taken today mattered. That bringing me that envelope and driving me to the lawyer had changed everything, and that from this point on, any relationship between us would have to be built on truth and not on saving face for anyone. As she left, closing the door gently behind her, I stood in the middle of that empty room with my daughter's hand in mine and listened to the silence. A different kind of silence than the one I had known in that other house. Not the silence of being ignored or judged, but the silence of a place waiting to hear our laughter, our footsteps, our small everyday struggles. And I realized that even though my heart was still bruised and my trust still thin, I had been given something precious, a chance to build a life that did not depend on someone else's last name or someone else's idea of what I deserved. That first night in that little apartment, after we had pushed our 2 bags against the wall and laid a blanket on the floor to make a soft place to sleep, I lay there with my daughter curled against me and listened to the quiet, and for the first time in years, the silence did not feel like a punishment. It felt like a clean page, a place where no one judged how much space I took up or how many times I walked from one room to another. And as the light from the window faded and the city outside settled, I realized that sometimes life does not give you the apology you need. It gives you a key and expects you to decide what to do with it. I thought about the woman I had been in that other house, walking on eggshells in rooms I helped pay for, apologizing for breathing too loud, believing that if I stayed small enough and kind enough, they would see my heart and protect it. And I compared her to the woman lying on that floor now, with nothing but a set of keys, a signed confession, and a child who still looked at me like I was her whole world. And I understood that losing a house was not the same as losing a home, because a home is not just walls and furniture. It is dignity, safety, and the feeling that the people you live with would never choose shame over your truth. I will not pretend that everything became easy after that. There were still bills to face, papers to sign, long conversations with banks and offices to clear my name from debts I never chose. There were nights when I sat at that small window and cried quietly for the man I loved and the life I thought we were building, and for the version of myself that believed love alone was enough to make people honest. But step by step, day by day, I began to feel my feet under me again. I found work. I learned how to stretch every dollar in this new place. I watched my daughter do her homework at a table we picked out together, and I saw how her shoulders relaxed in a home where nobody raised their voice just to remind us we were unwanted. In time, the anger settled into something calmer. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of acceptance. I accepted that my husband had been sick and afraid and weak, that his last clear act had been to try to protect us with that apartment and that letter. And I accepted that his family had made a choice to protect their pride instead of his truth, and that I could not change those choices, only refuse to let them define my worth. So if you are listening to me now, wherever you are and whatever you have been through, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not the worst thing someone said about you when they were trying to hide their own shame. You are not the sum of their whispers or their accusations. You are the one who keeps standing up, who keeps moving forward, who keeps holding on to the people who truly depend on you, even when your own heart is tired. If someone has ever made you feel like you did not belong in a place you helped hold together, I hope my story reminds you that sometimes being pushed out of the wrong door is what finally leads you to the right one, even if that first step out into the world feels like the end instead of the beginning. And now before I go, I want to thank you. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this story, for giving me your time and your attention. It means more than you know. Please let me know in the comments how this story made you feel. And if you have not already, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe so you can sit with me again for the next story, and we can keep walking through these hard memories together until they feel a little less heavy.